City University Television. In association with the Center for Advanced Study in Theater Arts. And the Harold Clurman Endowment. Presents Spotlight.
Welcome to the Harold Clurman Seminar in Theater. I'm Ed Wilson, and my guest is one of the foremost teachers of acting in the United States and also one of its most distinguished directors, Bobby Lewis. Bobby, welcome.
Thank you.
It's marvelous to have you here.
Well,
one of your first endeavors in the theater and one of your first associations was with an organization that many people think is the finest or the most interesting and the most provocative and productive theater organization this country has ever seen, the group theater. And it was also where I think you first became associated with Harold Clurman, for whom this seminar is named. Tell us about how you got involved with the group theater, and tell us a little about being with the group theater in those 10 years, I think from 1931 to 1941.
Right. I was there from the beginning and turned the key in the lock in the Sardi building when it closed down. Kazan and I went over with Harold in 1941. But before the group, believe it or not, I was in the Civic Repertory Theater with Miss LeGallion.
With Eva LeGallion?
Yes, the group was my second company that I'd been with. And how I got in was I was in a play after Miss LeGallion. I was in a play called Gods of the Lightning at the Provincetown Playhouse downtown. And Harold Clurman and Lee Strasberg came to see Sandy Meisner, who was a friend of theirs. He played the defense attorney, and the play was about Sacco and Vanzetti, and I played the Vanzetti part. And they saw me and came backstage after the show, and Strasberg said to me, "What were you trying to do?" Which is a question I realized later he always asks. And I thought I was just trying to do a good show, you know. And he said, "You think that was real emotion you had? That was just indicating." I didn't know what that word meant then, although the way he said it, I knew it was a dirty word. However, they must have seen something in my work, because they asked me to come to the meetings, which were held every Friday night in Steinway Hall. And Harold and Lee and Cheryl Crawford were trying to start a theater, which was subsequently would be called the group theater, and they invited actors whom they thought would be interested in, actors that they knew, to a series of meetings for one entire winter.
Was this about 1931? Was this what?
Well, it was 1930.
30, yes.
31 was the first year of the theater.
So the meetings went on all winter long?
All winter, and people came all the time, and a lot of us, when they came once, came every time, which I was one. And one night, Eunice Stoddard, who subsequently became a member of the group, brought a friend of hers along, ravishingly beautiful girl, who was an understudying Hortense Alden, who was an actress known at that time. And this girl had not played a part, but she was an understudy, and her name was Katharine Hepburn. And at the end of the meeting, Harold said to her, "Well, Miss Hepburn, would you like to join a group like this?" Because he'd been talking about ensemble theater and all of that. And she said, "Oh, no." She said, "That's all right for you people, but I'm going to become a star." Well, we were shocked, you know, because the whole point of the group was going to be that it was going to kill the star system, you see. And in later years, she always says, "I wasn't going to join anything where you play small parts." And later, I was in a movie with her in Dragon Seed and in the 40s, and I said, how remarkable it is now, Catherine, when I think about it, that you knew yourself so well that you knew that with your kind of individualistic personality that you couldn't fit into any group, and you knew that, and you were brave enough to say it. Well, at the end of that year, 28 of us were chosen, and we started in Brookfield Center, and every summer for 10 years we went away and prepared our plays for the fall and did our exercises and had our lectures and were educated to what a real theater is, which Harold kept telling us. I always thought that Harold took as his theme Gordon Craig's dictum, after you have reformed the art of the theater, you must remake the life of the theater. And that's what Harold was all about, and that's what the group was all about. It became an organization which not only did plays, but was a place where the work that we did was related to the life around us. And that was Kluwerman's great contribution.
So really an environment was created in which people could thrive, in which playwrights, actors, designers, everyone
directors,
could work.
Teachers, we all came out of that because there was a place. I wish there was some place like that now, because there really isn't, you know.
I think that's one reason people look back with such fondness and such admiration at the group theater, is because there hasn't been anything like it since, really, has there?
And the influence still exists because people who descend from it, not only we who were in it, but our pupils, now they all have pupils and they're all teaching and acting, so on. And the roster of people around the world. I just went to the Siècle Stanislavski in Paris in November, and people came from all over the world because it was Stanislavski's 50th anniversary of his death. And 160 speakers were there. It was really extraordinary. And all of them wanted to know always about the group. And
well, of course, it nurtured so many people, and it provided this atmosphere. And one of the visible things that came out of it were the plays of Clifford Odets, for example.
Right, well, Clifford was an actor.
Who was an actor and then became a playwright. And you were in several of his plays. I know you were in Waiting for Lefty and Golden Boy. And these were very visible things. That is, they later played in New York, and they became very successful and made the group really quite well known. But there was more to it than just that out front of being productions that ended up on Broadway.
Right, because in the summertime, you see, we took the 2 months and sometimes a little longer, not only to prepare the plays for the coming season, but to do all sorts of experimental work. And that's where I got interested in doing things with music and painting and experimental theater. I did a play called In New Kentucky, which was by Samuel Ornes. I don't think he ever wrote beyond the first act, but we did the first act, and it was a completely stylized production. And there I was, just a beginning director. I hadn't directed in New York at all, but Lee encouraged me and Harold encouraged me, and we worked on that in the summer. And so that by the time the group was ending, 10 years later, we, a number of us, Kazan, Meisner, Adler, myself, were teachers, directors, and so on, and the influence spread. Now, of course, when we went to England, it spread abroad, you see. We did Golden Boy at St. James's Theatre in London, and it really made an enormous impact on England. There were editorials as well as reviews about this kind of ensemble playing. They said they turned their backs on the audience. And we couldn't understand why we shouldn't, except that we thought that maybe they didn't because royalty might be in the house at any time and you weren't allowed to turn your backs. And they called us gutsy. I remember that word was used all the time. But as a result of that, Joan Littlewood's theater came out of that. plays of John Osborne, the whole...
The Royal Court, that whole
yes,
movement. Yes,
the whole English theater changed.
What you all were so well known for, you were known for several things in the group theater. Obviously, the realism, the believability, the fact that this all seems so real, which
Right.
was one of the things that Stanislavski had emphasized. But you all made a very American version of this, really.
Right.
And as you suggested, the ensemble playing, the playing together, which
Right.
in the kind of organization in which Miss Hepburn wouldn't have had a place, because you subordinated individual egos and stardom to a group effort, and it, of course, why it's called the group theater.
Exactly.
And, but one of the things that interests me about you in this setting that you've talked about, because this is what it's so well known for, the realism and the ensemble playing, is that they gave you an opportunity, the group theater did, to begin to be a director and to find your way as a director. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you did was experiment with certain poetic, certain musical, certain non-realistic things that were perhaps rooted in realism but went beyond it.
Yeah.
And your first real triumph as a director was My Heart's in the Highlands, the William Saroyan play in 1939.
Right.
And I guess did that grow out of the group experience then?
Oh, and how? First of all, what people don't realize is that nobody in the group theater company outside of Art Smith, who played the old man, the old Shakespearean actor, was in it. All the people were from my studio in the group theater because the group people didn't like that kind of a play. I remember Kazan said it was like a flute's complaint. And our stage manager said it's a piece of cheese and so on. They didn't like it.
This is My Heart's in the Highlands.
Yes, they didn't like it at all. And I, of course, had been working on musical improvisations and scenes and was always interested in styles other than realism, so that when you said before that the group was known for its realism and Stanislavski and all of that, I fought that from the beginning. And they used to call me Trotsky, which is the worst thing you could have called anybody in those days when everybody was a Stalinist, you see. So I was the sort of revisionist, and they called me Trotsky. And I remember when I started to work on Paradise Lost, which was a Clifford Odets play, and I played this firebug, and I started to work on all sorts of strange things. I had an accent. I had a black finger here, as though I might have burnt it in one of the fires I set. I had red hair that looked like flames, and a whole kind of stylized behavior. And one of the actresses in the play, when I started to work, I remember said, "Is he going to start that stuff again?" They were so dedicated to realism, which in my view was not, because realism is a style, it was really naturalism, you see, because we had been told, and I can say it now because it's 50 years later, we had been told that if we want to be truthful on the stage, we should say to ourselves, what would I do if I were in this situation? Well, that's wrong, because I'm not Hamlet. I'm Bobby.
Yeah.
So if I start to think in these situations of what I would do, I'd be light miles away from Hamlet and from Shakespeare. What you have to ask yourself is, what would I do if I were that character in that play, by that playwright, in that period, that class, and so on? And then you use your sense of truth to create a character. And that was the biggest error, I think, in the technique of the group theater, and was the thing that I fought all the time, because I was interested in creating characters and was interested in classics. Now, so was Morris Konofsky. Morris tried to have a Shakespeare class in the group. He didn't get very far, but he subsequently played all the great parts himself. But nobody was interested in that. Now, looking back again, in hindsight, it seems to me that it was not only because this spine, to use a Stanislavski term, of the group theater was to present new American plays that reflect the life of our times. That was the stated spine of our theater. Looking back on it, now I think that one of the reasons they didn't do classics, because after all, you can do a classic and make it reflect the life of your times.
Absolutely.
Do you see? As we well know. And was that the directors had a feeling for this kind of psychological acting. They had no feeling for verse, for language, for movement, for style and things like that. And so what you do, as you well know, you're a professor too, you know that what you do is you do something wrong, then you make a theory to support it.
Well, on this business of acting approach, acting styles,
Yes.
because you've been a student of that as well as a teacher of it all of your life, and I think time has proved that you were correct not to just follow this naturalistic bent that you were talking about and what would I do in this situation as opposed to what the character would do, because if you, looking through your career, you started teaching acting fairly early on, probably during the group. Right. Then after a time in Hollywood, then you were one of the founders of the Actors Studio. Right. You and Elia Kazan and Cheryl Crawford were the three founders. But through all of this, and even up to the present time, when you still are very active with your acting studio and your workshops, you have felt that acting should be more fully rounded. It should not be confined simply to the naturalism. And of course, time has proved that actors do need to be prepared in a multitude of styles and a multitude of approaches to really be able to be successful on the stage.
What people have to be careful of, I think, is that in their rush to do Shakespeare and Restoration and Molière and avant-garde and all of that, that they don't forget to imbue their pattern, their style, with a sense of truth. Because after all, it's not, the question is not only what and why you do something, which is what the realists do, and it's not just how you do it, which is what the style folk do now, but it's a combination of all three. And it seems to me that if you have some inner idea, there's no reason why you can't find the theatricalization for it. If you have some theatrical idea, there's no reason why you can't find the justification for it.
And the inner spirit.
Right. There you have the inside and the outside, and together they make a third force, which is what I have been working on all the time.
Would you call it a synthesis, more or less, of this?
Sure.
Now, I just want to, because I want to ask you, follow this up with another question.
Right. Because
in your first class, you had some really tremendously talented people you worked with when you started teaching with the group. In your first class at the Actors Studio.
Well, the studio is different from the group.
I know that, but I'm moving ahead now, because I know you had a group in the group theater. But in your first class, which I guess was around 1947 at the Actors Studio, and in your first class, I'm just going to read a few of these names: Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, Maureen Stapleton, Eli Wallach, Mildred Dunnock, Jerome Robbins, Herbert Berghoff, Ann Jackson, Sidney Lumet, Carl Malden, E.G. Marshall, Beatrice Straight, David Wayne. It's an extraordinary group.
Oh, it was remarkable,
and then a few years, about 20 years later, you were teaching at the Yale Drama School, head of the acting program there, and there you had people like Meryl Streep, Ken Howard, Sigourney Weaver, Henry Winkler in your class. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, has the approach that you've used in teaching through all of these years, has it changed, or has it remained very much the same, and also have the kinds of students you've had changed?
I hope it changes every day. I mean, nothing would be worse than for 50 years thinking the same and doing the same. Every time somebody gets up to do something, it's new and different and a challenge, because people often say, how could you go on teaching for so many years? Don't you get tired of it? And I said, well, if it were repetitious, I would get tired, but it never is. even if it's a scene you've seen many times before. Somebody else is doing it, and therefore a new element comes into it. So it's always different. It's never the same, and I keep changing too. By the way, Stanislavski, whom everybody is an authority on, was himself changing all the time, because I had to make a complete study of his life and work when I went to Paris in November to speak and lecture and have panels and workshops in this Siècle Stanislavski. And I found that there was never a time that he didn't change. Just to take one single example, the whole business of intention, which is what you mean by what you say rather than the literal meaning of the line, the thinking behind it, or whatever you want to call it. Well, he started out by calling that the task. And then it was called objective, then it was called the problems. All of these were constantly changed, and then later he came to what he called the method of physical action, then psychophysical action, and so on. There wasn't a year that he didn't change his mind about all of the things that he worked on. It's only the people who so-called disciples of his that get one idea and stick to it for the rest of their lives. He was constantly changing. I heard that in his great age, that he put some colored lights, electric light bulbs on a round spindle, and would turn it. And he'd have all blue lights, and then he'd change it to all yellow lights and so on, to see what the different emotional reaction is to different colors and things like that. Well, that hardly sounds like the Stanislavski method, does it? No. He was a man who was always experimenting, and to say that there's such a thing as a method actor, really, you can't say what I want to say on television, but it makes me quite angry, because there's no such thing. What the Stanislavski system is useful for is as a grammar of acting, just as you have to practice your scales and your arpeggios and your octaves and so on if you're going to play the piano, because those things come out somewhere in the Mozart sonata, so you better have a technique. And he has these various exercises, and since he has done them, which is, you know, half a century ago, he died in '38, everybody has been improving on them and so on and so forth. But you use what you need of it. After all, I study Brecht, I study Vakhtangov, I study Meyerhold, I study Grotowski, I study everybody, and steal from everybody too, whatever you want. And it just becomes a synthesis, you see, when you work. When you're up there directing a play, you don't think about these technical items. You have to direct the play. You have to interpret the play. And it always makes me laugh when an actor comes up to me and he says, "How'd you like my adjustment there?" You know, they have all this jargon that they say, "Get out of here." Anyway, that's the idea. If you have an attitude toward it, which is that he is a man like Freud, he was a seminal theater director, and you use what you need from it and forget the rest, and I'm sure he would have said the same.
Well, you have provided through all these years a sort of corrective to the people who get a very fixed idea or rigid idea of what it should or shouldn't be. And you gave that famous series of lectures called Method or Madness, which was in the late 50s. Right. In which you had a series of lectures on Monday nights at 11:30 in a Broadway theater and how many were there? Were there a series of about 10 or 12 lectures?
Yes.
And they were absolutely packed. I mean, every seat was taken by people who wanted to hear about this, because you threw a little fresh look and on the whole question of people who'd gotten carried away. Well, the title alone, Method or Madness. Yeah, and you suggested this same kind of balance that you're talking about now.
Right. And one needs to do that continuously. I do it every day.
Have
all
the
the time.
have the actors whom you teach through all of these years, have they become more receptive to this balanced view in the 40s, in the early 50s? Were they more taken up with this obsession with naturalism and inner feelings?
Well, you can't generalize about actors. I mean, if you ask me about a particular actor, I could tell you, for example, Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep is a character actor, you know. She can play anything. She doesn't like to play herself even, you know. She's always looking for elements of characterization, and that, of course, is what I emphasize all the time, that you have to play a character. But what happens is that since the old-fashioned Methodists, with a dash after method, what they do is they end up in the movies and play themselves or not 5 minutes away from their daily behavior patterns. And if you ask them to do something, I asked a very fine actress, you know, to do Mrs. Alving in Ghost. She said, "Oh, I can't talk like that." I said, "What do you mean? She's a modern woman. It isn't verse that I'm asking you to do." But even that, she says, "Oh, I can't talk that kind of stuff." They have to just be themselves. And I don't think that Laurence Olivier would like that.
No. Well, and actually, do you think that might be one difference between the stage and film in a way? That is, a stage actor or actress really has to be able to play a whole range of characters.
Actors can characterize in movies. The trouble with it is they don't let you. They could, you know,
yes.
but the first thing they say to you when you walk on a set is, "No acting, please." You know, they're so afraid you're going to do something that's not what they bought. They bought you, and they want your personality. They don't want you to disguise yourself. But if you're brave, the way Meryl is, you say, "The hell with that," and you go ahead and you do it. And she's triumphed. She's, you know, she's been nominated 8 times, I think.
I know.
And she's again this time. So she's going to do it. And if others can do it too, you have to take a stand, though.
Well, we're just about out of time, Bobby, which is a great shame. But I think I hear you saying that today's young actors and actresses still love the stage and the challenge of the stage, despite the glamour and allure of movies and television. Would you say?
I hope so.
We hope so. Thank you so much. This has been the Harold Clerman Seminar on Theater, and my guest has been an eminent stage director and teacher of acting, Robert Lewis. Thank you for being with us.